Oh, hi everybody. So we got Chuck Shinn here today. Hi, Chuck.
How you doing, Chuck? It's the
Good.
Chuck Show.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so Chuck, why don't you just tell us about your career, your history, and what you've been up to all these many years?
Well, my career in this industry goes back 58 years. I started in 1968, and I continually think it was divine intervention that got me into this industry. But I started out in 1968 after I got my MBA, and I joined the economics operation for the National Association of Home Builders and became the assistant executive vice president or is assistant director of economics under Mike Sumercrest. At that point, NAHB had no idea who their members were. Absolutely had no idea. They split off of the realtors in 1947. And when I joined the economics department, one of the first things I had to do was to do a membership survey of the builders, which was probably one of the greatest things in the world because I found out all I wanted to know about builders, I mean, everything. And we designed the survey, conducted the survey, and then published it as NAH Builder Profile. That was the first time they'd ever done anything like that. We also put together a thing called cost of construction, which was a survey system that we did, surveying the builders. At that point, there wasn't a whole bunch of variety in the builders. There were no national builders. It was basically the builders were 20 units or less around the country, all local. So we did this of construction with a standard plan and sent it to builders throughout the country. And they priced out that standard house so we could come up with a cost of construction by metropolitan area across the country. Uh, During that period of time, I also was a spokesman for the industry. I was running around the country being the keynote speaker for Denver or for builder groups around the country. Their monthly meetings, I would be there to give them kind of an economic outlook of what was going on and so forth. We also got involved. That was a period of time that was absolutely fantastic for housing. We had the Omnibus Housing Act that was going on. So as the one of the economists, the assistant director of economics, Mike Sumcrest didn't want to be involved in a lot of this stuff. So I became the stats and facts guy behind Joe McGrath, who was the lobbyist for NAHB. And so I met with a lot of congressmen and senators, and I was on the Hill in testimony, but I was basically the facts guy behind the main lobbyist. Um, there's a little story about that. One time at about that period of time, Mike Summercrest and I were going to lunch, and our office was on the seventh floor of the housing center, and the executive suites were on the sixth floor of the housing center. And we were on the elevator, and the elevator stopped on the sixth floor, and a congressman got on the elevator. And he turned to the two of us and says, "How many houses do we need to build in the next decade?" And by the time we reached, while we were on the elevator, Mike said, 26 million. And the elevator opened up, and Mike and I went to lunch, and the congressman went to a press conference. And all of a sudden, we had the national housing goals, like we were going to go to the moon in 10 years under Kennedy. Well,
Right.
now we had the housing goals. We are going to build 26 million houses to satisfy all the housing needs in the country. Um, when I got back from lunch, my phone was ringing off the hook from every national publication there was at that point, uh, wanting justification for the 26 million. Well, there was no justification for the 26 million. It was just something that came off Mike's the top of Mike's head. Um, so eventually, people started justifying it. I don't know how because we couldn't justify it.
Backfill to make
Yeah,
it. That's right.
Exactly. And then it ended up to be 2.6 million per year. Well, also at that point, we had some subsidy programs and so forth. We couldn't figure out how to make 2.6 million housing units a year. So we were counting dog houses. We were counting anything and everything that we could count to say we met the goal to have it done. So that was an interesting period of time. In 1970, I took over the business management operation, became the director of business management. That's also the time that Emma joined me. We got married. We both got our MBAs together in 1968, and in 1970 we got married. So she married into the home building industry. She really wasn't planning on that, but that's what happened to her. Um, and what we were responsible for was developing business systems, business management systems and procedures and processes for the industry at that point. Um, One of the things that we developed was a book of business forms for home builders. We didn't have anything. The only thing we had was AIA and AGC forms, which were absolutely terrible for home builders.
Yeah.
Your variance column was always positive until you had the last draw or last payment of bills, and then it went all negative. So they were absolutely atrocious, but they were done by AIA, and that was kind of the standard. So we had to
Which is the
develop,
architectural industry.
yeah, the Association of Architects,
Yes.
and they controlled most of the construction at that point. And we were oddballs because we were home builders. We weren't building big skyscrapers and commercial buildings and things of that nature. So we had to come up with a set of forms that would work with the fact that we had replication of the same building over and over again, and it was going to be done in less than a year. So that's basically how we got started in looking at forms. So we produced a book of forms for the builders at that point that made more sense for home builders. And then we were going to do a thing called the cost of doing business study. The the format for that was the dollars and cents of shopping centers. They had already done that. And we decided that we would do a cost of doing business study. So we started doing the cost of doing business study, and it was a disaster. The first one basically went into the trash can. There was no standardization of anything. One guy sent me his checkbooks. And I said, "What the hell is this?" He says, "That's my accounting system." He says, "I open up a checkbook for every house I build. And if there's still money in the checking account when I finish, I made money. If I had to put money into the account, I lost money." I said, "Okay, so what do you do at the end of the year?" He says, "I bundle up all my checking accounts and I send them to my CPA." That's how sophisticated the industry was. So having just married Emma and her MBA is in accounting, I recruited her to write the first cost of doing business study or the accounting system for all builders. Took her about 2 years, but the accounting system, the way I wanted it set up, was that the home builder had to understand it. So what she did is write it, and then she'd hand it to the dumb builder, me, and I'd read it. And I said, "I don't understand what you're telling me, so you have to rewrite it." So she wrote it mainly for the builders, not for the accountants. And when we first published it, it was called The Accounting System for All Builders.
Yeah, and I would eventually go on to read that book, and that's how I learned accounting.
Well, that book, I think she had four versions of that book. It's now been changed to account. I got a copy of it here. I'll put it up there. Accounting and Financial Management for Us, and for residential construction. She's done that 6 times. So she's been the author ever since 1972. And she's written, I guess, 10 editions of the book since then. You can get it from NAHB, you can get it from Amazon. It's used as a textbook for a lot of the university programs around the country. Um, so basically, those were some of the things that we were doing at that time. We were also doing a lot of seminars. At that point, HBI was not involved in the educational stuff. They were doing education for vets, for uh, prison people that had been in prison and so forth, but they had government contracts and they basically were working government contracts. There's a yeah, so NAHB had a seminars and workshops operation, which I got involved with, and I was responsible for doing business management seminars, sales and marketing seminars, production seminars, estimating seminars. That's where I met Lee Evans. Lee was one of my speakers for the business management seminars at that point. So that's kind of how we got together. The first time that Emma met Lee was in New Orleans at a seminar shortly after we got married. And Lee was a speaker, and Lee and Virginia were there. And we actually formed a kind of relationship at that point. So that was pretty good. Some of the other things that I got involved with at that point was they asked me to develop a war room for all the convention programs because at that point, every department would come together with every one of the technical departments would submit programs for the convention. And it wasn't like it is now where they ask people to submit. It was each department would submit. Well, they didn't have any organization of how they were going to put those seminars together. So they asked me to put a war room together to do the to do the seminars. And what the problem was all the marketing seminars would be on the same day, same time. So if you're in marketing, you would have 3 or 4 programs all on the same day, but it wouldn't be spread out through the convention. So what I was trying to do was to get it spread out so that every day, every time slot, there was a marketing program, there was a design program, there was a technical program, and so forth. And then what came out of that is I designed a thing called the critical path for the convention programs. So at that point, what I did is color code it in this critical path, and the critical path was published for everybody that came to the seminar. So if you were in marketing, you follow the red. If you were in design, you follow the green. But you would have a green spot all the way through the convention so that you knew that that was the track that you should follow. They still use it. It's not as good as it used to be. It's not color coded, but they still have kind of this critical path going through the operation. One of the other things that I got way out of this little department that I was trying to run, but I got recruited as one of 3 people to develop the HOW program. What the problem was the federal government was going to set up a warranty program where the home builders had to warrant their house for the life of the house. And we said,
What
no,
is the
no,
life of the house, though? How do you define the life of the house?
whenever you tear it down. I mean that's what we were fighting against with Congress. So we said, no, 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 you don't pass any legislation. We'll manage ourselves.
Yeah, right.
So we developed what was known as HOW, or the Homeowners Warranty Program. It was kind of after a Canadian and British program that we put together, but it was the first 10-year warranty program in the operation. And there's a guy by the name of Pete Belisarius, and then um, um, one other fellow, and the 3 of us put the program together. And I mean, there's all kinds of stories about that.
By the way, what year is this that you're talking about right now?
That would have been probably 72
Okay.
where we put it out.
The year I graduated from high school.
That's about the time that we did the HAL program, and we didn't know what to charge for it. And so the way we were going to charge for it was 50 cents goes to the local home builders association, 50 cents goes to NAHB, and we probably have some kind of a guinea pig insurance company that will insure it for a dollar a thousand. We found somebody in Florida that agreed to take the premium as a dollar a thousand. So we sent it out there. There was no justification for the $2 per thousand. Nothing. But it went out and it became the first program. And it didn't surprise me that it finally went broke because there was no actuarial reason for it being there. But that's what happened. My first involvement in, well, it wasn't my first, but while I was there at NAHB in the business management operation, we got together with McBee Corporation to develop a one-right system. And the builder that we were working with was a fellow by the name of Roy Rainey out of Little Rock, Arkansas. Okay. What I'm saying is that I joined, we got together with McBee Corporation, which was a run right operation. Um, and we were working with a fellow by the name of Roy Rainey. And Roy Rainey had a bunch of forms. It was all manual forms. But what we developed was a setup that where you would do your estimate. That estimate was on it was basically a bunch of pieces of paper and you just Xeroxed them. And you took that form and you made it a bid sheet. And then the trades would bid it. And then you would use that as the PO.
Nice.
And that PO would become the pay point. So it was tied to the construction schedule, and that's how the trade was going to be paid. So it was a one increase system, and and the McBee system was a pegboard system. So when you wrote your checks, you were writing your general ledger, you were writing all your job cost sheet, you were writing everything at the same time. So there became the one-to-one-to-one relationship. And this would have been,
Then we program later, and
yeah, this is probably also around 72. No, it had to be before 72 because in 72 I became the assistant to the executive vice president of the association. Um, but the other thing that I looked at was there were a bunch of early trials to get computerized. There's a fellow by the name of Ken Leventhal, who was an accountant out of California, and he tried to get computerization into the industry. Then there was a fellow by the name of Bill Smolkin, who was a marketing consultant out of New Orleans, and he was working to get some computerization into the industry. And then and I don't remember who was doing this, but out of Chicago, there was a group of people that were trying to set up um, a timeshare program where you have your big phone and you put it in a receiver and then you tie to the computer in Chicago and then you would get your reports back out of Chicago. None of them went anywhere, but they were 70, 72 era of trying to get computerization into the industry. Uh, in 72, I became the assistant to the executive vice president, which basically I got out of working with the builders because now I was running the internal operations of the National Association of Home Builders. I had a staff of about 200 people, and that was totally unorganized also. So one of the first things I did was create a purchasing department because every little department was purchasing whatever they wanted to purchase. There was no checks and balances. There was no anything anywhere in the system. So everybody hated me because I did that because I took some authority away from them and centralized it in the operation. Um, they, I was responsible for managing the operating budget of the association. at that point. So again, one of the problems that we had was how do you how do you set up budgets and then control the budgets for all these departments that were pretty much running independently as they did what they were doing. Um, at one point during that period of time, I developed a system which I call the cost benefit system for all the services that an AHP did, builder services. Because we had all these services, but we didn't know whether or not anybody was using them, whether or not they were any good. We had staff for them and everything else. So we had to come up and say, okay, we're spending this much money for this service. Who's taking advantage of that service? So we developed a cost benefit methodology to begin to analyze that. The other thing I ended up doing was remodeling the housing center. And then I was the owner rep for building the new housing center, which was dedicated in 1975. And that was an experience. That's a whole different story in the operation. But I left NAHB in 1975 to take over the operation at the University of Denver, the real estate construction management operation. I became the director of that operation in 1975. Now, what happened there was I was very close to the executive vice president as his assistant running the operation. He got crosswise with the board, and the board was going to buy his contract. And I had a bunch of the board members come in and say, Chuck, go away. You're too close to Nat. And so my idea was to go to Denver for a year and then go back to NHB. That's pretty much, I just needed to get clear of the hatchet at that point. Well, I had no plan of going to the University of Denver, but Lee had just left the University of Denver. And when they were looking for somebody, since I was in a PhD program, and that's another story that Mike Simmercrest is the one that got me into the PhD program, who was my boss in the economics department. But the University of Denver contacted me and I said, well, I like Colorado and I need to go away for a year. So maybe I'll go out there and be a teacher for a year. So that's what happened there. And I ended up going to the university. But the neat thing was I was training the next generation of builders because about 70% of my students were sons and daughters of friends of mine. So Emma and I just took them in as family and so we had these kids that we were working with, trying to train them to come take the companies over at that point in the operation. So during that period of time, I created an MBA program for the university in RECM, or the real estate and construction management. And then the other thing that I did was get the school to recognize the real estate and construction management program as a real school. So it's ended up to be the Burns School of Real Estate and Construction Management. And then one of the other key things that I did, which I thought was pretty good, was at that point, there was no student organization of NAHB. If you were running a university, you were going to have to be an associate member of NAHB, and they didn't recognize any students. So in Las Vegas, at the Agiers Hotel, my student organization under Beth Palmer and Craig Bleets, they were both son and daughter of friends of ours. Harold Palmer, Harold Palmer's daughter, which was talked about. And they invited all the students that were at the convention to come to a reception. We bought beer, we bought pretzels and so forth and so on. And then we invited the board of directors and the officers of NAHB to come to the reception. And it was multiple hundreds of people that showed up. NHB never understood that they had so many students that were coming to their convention. And that led to HBI beginning to put together a student organization and so forth. So that was pretty neat. The first relationship that we had, Chuck, was in about 1975. Um, when I was at the University of Denver, um, we worked together with Mike Johnson,
Yeah,
and Mike Johnson and I would meet at least once a month at Writers Manor, and we'd sit down and start talking about what does a computer have to, what's the input information that the computer should have, and what should the output look like. And at that point, I decided that the computer is just a tool that if I started getting into programming and so forth, I'd probably never get out of the box. So my responsibility was to say, okay, what do we do? This is what the builder has. This is the information the builder is going to give you. This is what the information needs to look like, and this is how it's supposed to come out of the box. And we spent maybe a couple of years doing that, year and a half. And the neat thing was that about it was that Chuck would leave. We'd both probably be drunk by the time that we got out of the hotel. But when we came back the next time, Mike had it done. And I guess he was coming back to you and talking to you, and this is what we need to do, and you guys would program it and so forth, and it was working.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
it really
He
was a
spent it on you.
fantastic relationship. Um, when Mike left to go over to Johnson, Bill, whatever, what was it originally called? Mike
Johnson
Johnson,
Cosby.
Johnson Cosby, right? That. Then I was working with another person who we were trying to get the estimating system up and running. And that fell apart because we didn't talk same language at all. So that never really uh, formed very well at that operation. But the Tom involvement was Mike and you.
And Tom, of course,
And
it's just a background here. Tom is the Tom system, which was primarily a big accounting system that then Mike and you would talk, and Mike would come back to me, and I added all these extra features to make it home builder oriented.
it was a fantastic system for what it was. Yeah, it was called The Office Managers, and that's how it became. That was the company that we were working with, that you guys were working for, and it became the Tom system.
Yep.
And that was really the first one working off of a Wang. And I understand there's somebody that there. I think there's still builders that are on Wang.
And just for the audience, Wang was a mini computer company um, that we programmed everything on a mini computer back in those days. We didn't have PCs.
Right. And there was some kind of relationship between Wang and IBM, that where Wang had the relationship with us. Um, but I still think somebody's out there that's got old Wang parts that he's cannibalizing to keep some of the builders alive on the system. I don't know.
Chris
But
Maxwell.
I ran into somebody that said that there was somebody in the country that's cannibalizing old Wang computers to be able to make them still work. Anyway, um, at that point, I met at some point during the Tom relationship, I met Craig Schweikert, who actually ended up working with me for about 7 years, and doing computer analysis and working with the builders and trying to help them decide what their systems are doing, looking at are the systems really working? Is it the right system for you? So forth and so on. So, and then we met Chris Maxwell, and Chris Maxwell, I think, is the last man standing. And he changed the name from Tom to the Maxwell system, but Tom is still the basis of what he's.
Yeah, that was just a name change.
Hmm?
That was just a name change.
Yeah. The only problem with the Tom system was it's too flexible.
Right.
Yeah, and that's partly what happened with Fast because you made it very unflexible. You're gonna, for the builders, and that's one of the things that the builders always complained about. Well, it won't let me do what I want to do. No, you follow the procedures.
Right. It won't let you.
You'd be surprised at how well it works.
You're right. It won't let you shoot yourself in the foot.
So, um, anyway, at that point, Emma became the main consultant with Fast more than me because I was still tied in with the Tom system at that point. And so when Mike and Emma were together, they kind of went around the barn and said, "Well, Emma, you'll be the main consultant with Fast." Um, so that's kind of what was going on. As and after once we got involved with Fast, I was still at the university, and Mike became a guest lecturer for me at the university. And they ended up hiring a whole bunch of my students. There's a couple, with you guys with Fast, I had my student aide was Pat Hamill,
Yeah.
and Pat and Mike got very close. And then when Mike graduated, he set up a program, I think, to implement Fast, and he was hiring all my students. So I'd have my senior class, my, and nobody'd be there. And I said, where the hell is everybody? Well, they're all working with Pat. They're installing Fast systems. So I go back and um, there are a couple of people that you did hire. The Jim Garvey, who's down in Australia now, was a trainer for you guys. And there was a guy by the name of Keith Lures, who's also in Australia. I don't know what the Australia connection was. But there were a number of my students that ended up working with Fast during that period of time. The other thing, as the builders started going into Fast and trying to get Fast to work, we formed 3 Fast builder groups. Um, at that point, that would have been probably in somewhere in the 90s, probably, maybe earlier than that.
Hmm.
But we had three builder groups of about 12 builders each. They were all implementing Fast. We're trying to get their reports right and so forth. And they were cross-fertilizing themselves and how to make Fast work. And that was a really interesting period of time. And I still look at Fast and said that's probably the best system out there. We've got a lot of systems out there, but the one that really tied all the parts and pieces together and made them work, yeah, it's old. It might be a little clunky, but it's the best system that we had. There was an effort to come up with another system, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but it's um, it it's gone as far as I'm concerned. There were two other things that happened with Fast that, and I mentioned to you, Chuck, that maybe you don't know. Village, this would have been in the 90s, but Village Home did the first
Pat
builder.
Hamill,
Pat Hamill?
is that Village Homes?
Village Homes, no, it wasn't Pat. It was Pat Hamill worked for them as an intern.
Okay, yeah.
at one point. Village Homes here in Colorado. Um, and they were a big fast user for a long time. And what they did was they spent about $50,000 developing the first builder portal. Um, and that would have been 90, 91, 92, somewhere in there. And then there was another thing that happened, which I'll talk about a little later. But Henry Company Homes, with Don Evans, who I ran an operation down in Daytona Beach, he actually tied 3D CAD architecture into FAST. And you mentioned the fact that you had created a backdoor into
Yeah.
FAST,
Yeah, I wrote the interface.
and somehow he found it, or you wrote it for him, and then they
I
were
think I was
able.
working with him.
Okay, you were working with him. Okay, well, I was on the other side.
I'd already written it for someone else, and I was just helping him uh, take advantage of it.
Okay, all right. Well, it worked. It worked, and eventually Don went to Pensacola and worked with the Henry Company for quite a while at that point. So anyway, this is kind of my fast background of what happened. Um, from 75 to 96, I was a builder. And that what I used when I was a builder, basically I used the building company as a laboratory. Said, okay, we've developed all this stuff. Does it work? What works, what doesn't work, and so forth. Some of it I threw away because it just didn't work. I'm
Yeah.
out there, we're preaching this stuff, and but it was too hard to actually work with. Well, during that period of time, I also became very involved with NAHB. I was president of my local Homebuild Association. I became the interim executive vice president of the Denver HBA. I'm a senior life director now for NAHB. I co-chair NCHI, which is the Manufacturers Council. The only reason I mentioned that is that allowed me to tie in other things that I've been able to do over the years, tie our builder supply business in with the home builders. And I have this thing called builder partnerships that's really a networking between the large private builders and the manufacturers to get them to start talking to each other, because that at one point there was no relationship at all with the
Right. Yeah.
larger private builders. They were interested in the public builders, but they weren't interested in the private builders. Um, so anyway, I spent probably, well, almost 20 years in the building operation, doing building, construction rehab, um, remodeling, and so forth, actually doing the systems and making sure that everything worked the way it was supposed to work in the operation. Um, During that period of time, um, we, well, a couple of things that I looked at. I said, um, I got asked to create a group of operations for the National Association of Home Builders. They put me in charge of a committee to set up the single family committees. We set up 4 single family committees. We set up a custom builder committee, a small volume builder committee, a medium-sized builder, and a large volume builder committee. Now, NAHB in the past has done councils, but they would not allow us to do councils for the single family operations because NAHB was a council for the realtors and they split off. And they were scared to death about creating councils for these builders, that the custom builders would split off as a custom builder organization, or the national builders would split off as the National Builders
Right.
Association. So they wouldn't allow that to happen. Um, then as and I go back in and say, okay, we now what we're doing for as consultants. Uh, After that, we opened up the Shinn consulting operation in 1970. Um, and the idea there was to be educational and research, not necessarily consulting, but more educational and research. So we developed a whole series. I think we had 28 seminars. They were designed not necessarily for the builder, but for the builder's staff. One of the things I looked at is all the training was going on for the builder. And what Lee was doing was programs for the builders. But the builders aren't the implementers. The implementers are the staff. So one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to have our seminars regional around the country, and we wanted them to have same backbone, but to train all the key staff into the systems because those were the implementers. So we ran around the country doing seminars. At one point, I was on the road 270, 300 days out of the year
Yeah.
doing seminars and doing work with builders and so forth. Um, so that we did that. We also then developed 5 other builder groups. We right now have 5 builder groups. Again, they're all set up about 12 builders per builder group and non uh, in non-competing situations around the country. They're basically set up by size and so forth. NHP took the idea and made their Builder 20 clubs. So I actually had their staff come sit in my builder groups, and they just mirror image that and made them the their builder groups or builder 20s is what they call them. But those charts, those groups are great. Then the other thing with the seminars and with the builder groups, what we've begun to look at, and this goes back to when you had, I don't even remember if anybody knows what chart pack is.
I don't recognize it.
Okay. Well, it's before computers. What we were doing the charting of information for the builders. We looked at it and said builders are visual. You give them a table of numbers and they'll have absolutely no idea what the hell a table of numbers is. But if you give them a chart to say, oh, what the hell's that happening there? And so what we began to do was to chart the information for them. I get concerned that none of the software really will do the charting, but that's okay. So this goes back to chart pack was you have an acetate and you have this strip of color that you would put on the acetate to represent a chart. So these were all manual charts that we were doing in the early days for the seminars and for the builders. Um, and basically, we were looking at the fact that they were all visual people. Well, we started doing the financial charts for our builder groups and for our management seminars, which for a seminar, we'll take all the information they give us. They give us tons of financial information, and we'll chart it and we'll put it up against each other. Each guy will have a control number, and we'll put their numbers up on the chart, and we'll show how they ranked all the other builders that are in the room. We've done that for bankers, for their builder clients. We've done it for our builders and our builder groups. We do it for the seminars and so forth. Has a great, fantastic result of being able to do that. Uh, and then one of the things that came out of that, and one of the things that comes out of the seminars, I used to get mad every time we had a coffee break or a lunch break or whatever we had. The builders would run off and get on the phone and call their office. I said, "My God, it's like a tether. They can't get away from the office."
Right.
So what we started talking about, and it took us about 2 years to develop it, was to develop a dashboard of numbers, critical numbers. And when I was looking at it, I said, if you got a tablet, every time you turn your tablet on, you have a screensaver, and the screensaver pops up, and it's your critical numbers for your company. So you always have them in front of you.
Yeah.
As of 5 minutes ago, this is what your company looks like. Well, and that actually came about. We were in Phoenix, and there was a company, and they showed me their management report. And their management report was about this thick.
Wait, I can't see.
There you go. About that thick. 8 inches
Okay.
of financial information that the computer produced. And it comes every month. And I said, well, that's great. That's a doorstop. And I get a new doorstop every month. I said, who the hell has the time? And he says, oh, we spend days in retreats reviewing all this information. I said, who's going to look at it? I said, there's really important information in there. I'm sure, but it's buried in all the rest of the stuff in there. You have no idea what you have to look at. So how do we come up with a report that tells you what the critical numbers are that you have to pay attention to? So we spent about 2 years developing what we call the 2-minute report, which was, and we did it with builders. So through our builder groups, we had the builder groups meet, and we would talk to them about, okay, what are the critical numbers that you need to run your business and so forth. And we boiled it down to what we call the 2-minute report. Now, we produced the 2-minute report in 2001 in that operation. So I still would love to see the software come up with a 2-minute management report. Um, some of them have come up and said they've had a 2-minute management report, but I look at them and I don't know how you would ever look at that in 2 minutes or less.
Yeah.
You know, it's really important for the top management to be able to know what's going on in the company and not to have the information buried in other information. I used to say that your computer, I said, it's a fantastic computer. It produces a lot of reports. But I look at it and I say that it's useless reports because the critical numbers are buried in the report. You get a job cost report. I got 100 houses under production. I got a job cost report. On 100 houses, I have 100 cost codes per house. Okay, so how many line items do I have? And then how many columns per line item? Somewhere in there, there's something that's not working that I got to pay attention to, but it's buried in stuff that I don't need to pay attention to.
Right.
So how can I change the operation to make it more streamlined for me? So anyway, that's some of the stuff that we did. The other thing that in 1992 to now, Emma has been doing a thing called the Home Builder Financial and Operational Analysis. It's everything you ever want to know about a home builder. Everything. Everything financial, everything operational. How many people do they have in purchasing? How many superintendents do they have? How many units can a superintendent supervise? How many communities do they have to build 150 units a year? I mean, everything you want to know by the builder. She's been doing that for 32 years. And she's in the other room right now trying to write the little captions, the final piece for her study. Then another thing that we ended up doing in 1990, it was about 1990. We went to the NAHB convention, and every architectural firm that was exhibiting at the convention said, we have CAD estimating, we have CAD estimating, we have CAD estimating. So I challenged them all. I said, if you do, come give me a presentation on what you're producing, and I'll promote the hell out of it. Well, nobody came. And some of them that showed me what they were doing, you have 3,852 board feet of 2x4. How the hell are you going to buy it? What good is that number? And so I tied in with a fellow by the name of Don Evans down in Daytona Beach, and another fellow by the name of Bill Falk. And what we did was began to make CAD, 3D CAD actually work and produce reports. Argos was the first system that really did it. And then we took what we learned with Argos and then got AutoCAD, 3D AutoCAD to do it, SoftPlan to do it, and Chief Architect to do it. So what happened was that little research lab, and then we had a training facility down in Daytona Beach to train them how to do 3D estimating. We tried to teach architects. Architects didn't want to know.
Yeah, they don't.
They didn't want to get involved in any of that stuff. But we could get the purchasing department, the purchasing guys, to come learn how to use 3D CAD and to do CAD estimating. And so I mentioned two of them. We had a builder in Seattle. They had their own architectural firm. The architectural firm would design 2D stupid plans, and then it would go over to the purchasing department, and the purchasing department would sketch it in 3D to come up with the quantities.
Do you remember the name of that builder?
Oh God, he was a custom home builder, and I can't remember his name, but he was absolutely super. His purchasing people were fantastic, but he couldn't train the architects anything to do anything. Um, it'll come to me. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot of years ago, and I don't remember. Emma's probably got a file on him and so forth. And then Taylor Morley out of St. Louis, the guy by the name of John Bennett was a purchasing guy and at Taylor Morley. And he did the same thing. He did the 3D CAD estimating out of his operation, and he was great. He was absolutely fantastic. Um, what happened to my CAD operation is it ended up as the Syntex purchasing department.
Hmm.
They came down to my Daytona. We were doing a lot of stuff for Syntex, and one of the guys came down to my operation in Daytona, and they hired Bill Falk, who was a CAD engineer, and he went to Raleigh, and they created their CAD operation out of Raleigh, and it kind of devastated my operation down in Daytona. It really hurt Don Evans because Don was really the guy that was doing everything. It's just Bill ended up going to the Syntex. So that was kind of the end of that operation that we did. The other thing that I mentioned was our builder partnerships thing, which is really with the manufacturers, trying to get the manufacturers to pay attention to the large volume builder, large single or large private builders
Yes,
um,
of single family homes.
of single family homes. Yeah, they really weren't paying that much attention to them. And what happened was my involvement with NCHI, which was the manufacturer's arm of NAHB. They would come to me and say, "We don't know the private builders. We know all the public builders. We spend all our time with the public builders. We don't make any money from them. We make our money from the private builders, but we don't know who they are." And at the same time, the builders are coming to me and says, "We can't get out of the distributor or the local rep company. We can't get back to the manufacturer. So we're having a hard time competing with the publics." So the idea was, let's go around, and there were organizations that were trying to change the distribution channel. And I said, there's no way this distribution channel's been around for 200 years. There's no way I'm going to change the distribution channel, but I can go around the distribution channel by setting up a network between the large builders and the manufacturers outside the distribution. You're still going to buy from the local people, but you're going to have a relationship with the manufacturer as opposed to just with the local distributor. So that has been working. It's not it hasn't done as well as I thought it was going to do, but it's been working in the operation. Then I started looking at what the other softwares. Um, we were involved with Timberline, and Timberline predates a lot of what we do. Timberline was a commercial contractor software, um, general contractors. Tom Gibas was a VAR for Timberline. That's how he got started. He developed a purchase order system for a company called Genesee Land Company here in town. I worked with them as builder. Um, and he, and that's how he got into the home building business by developing this purchasing software for home builders, different than general contractors, because it was falling apart. Well, as we were working with other builders as consultants, and the other builders were on Timberline, Tom Gibas became our go-to person because Timberline really didn't work very well for builders. So what we did was have Tom come in as kind of a sub consultant with us to kind of straighten out Timberline and to get his purchasing system operational. Well, Tom, so he was our go-to person, and then Tom developed Builder MT, and the Builder MT, what he did with Builder MT, I was doing a seminar for him for all of his people. And I said, someday somebody's going to develop a hub because you buy the integrated system. Some of the integrated system works, some of the integrated system doesn't work, but somebody's going to develop a hub to where you can take this accounting system and this production system and this purchasing system and so forth. You can tie them together so they can all work as one. And Tom did it. That's basically what Builder MT was developing a hub of what he called best of breed. The only problem with that, he used to get mad at me because I told him it didn't work. He said, well, I followed what you told me to do. And I said, yeah, but Tom, it doesn't work. Every time one of those pieces of software has a new addition, a revision, or whatever, it screws up all the connectors. And so all of a sudden you have download, upload, download, upload, download, upload through the systems, and it wasn't functioning well. And it's now a dead system because he sold it to MyTech, and MyTech, I think, has killed it in the operation. Then you had BuildSoft, which was Keith Brown.
Keith Brown, yeah.
And that system was for basically small volume builders. It really wasn't a competitor for Fast at all.
Yeah.
It was a small volume builder system. But he became BuildNet. And I'll talk about that in a second. Then you had JD Edwards. JD Edwards was for the public builders. And it was basically for the public builders because they had a really good accounting system to do the stuff that Wall Street wanted, the
Right.
consolidations and all the rest of the stuff. It had a terrible operating system. And I can remember there was one period of time where I met with JDE and Fast in a meeting out west somewhere with one of the gals that worked for Fast. I forget who it was, but we were trying to get JDE and Fast to work together. So JDE was doing the stuff for the public builders and Wall Street, and Fast was the operating system under JDE that would allow the divisions of the builder to actually have a good operational system. And it didn't go anywhere, but it was an interesting effort to try to get Fast and JDE to join forces at one point. Um, and I don't even remember when that was. But that, you might know.
Yeah, sometime in the 90s.
Probably in the 90s. Yeah, it probably was in the 90s. That was a big period of time at that point. Then you got New Star, and New Star came in, I think it came in with Constellation or Constellation bought it. They're both Canadian operations. And New Star was a property management operation in Canada. And one of the things that was really nice about New Star is it handled the Canadian taxes
Yeah.
extremely well. And so Canadian builders were starting to work on New Star. New Star came to the United States. Sold a lot of systems. They had good sales system and good sales people, I should say.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, but it didn't work. It's been a product and progress for a very long period of time. Um, now, most of the larger private builders are on New Star. I would say in my builder groups, um, just about anybody that's over 300 units a year or thereabouts is probably on New Star, right, at this point. You got Marks, which is part of ECI, and that was a regional program that came out of New England. I didn't pay too much attention to it, and then they didn't pay too much attention to me either. But they were out of New Star, out of New England, and then they went nationwide. Um, it's not been that long, I don't think. Although after almost 60 years in this industry, not too long, could be 20 years.
You're right.
So, they came into the industry. The fellow by the name Don Scattergood
Yeah.
was basically the key salesperson, key person that was involved with that. Marks was still around. Um, Monica, my daughter, my second daughter, actually works with ECI. She and I crossed swords at one time, and she left, and she's been working with ECI and been very happy with ECI. Then you got Hyphen. Um, Hyphen bought Bricks. Bricks was Lloyd Elliott Harris's system. It was basically a Texas system.
Yeah.
Um, and Lloyd used to hate me because every time I had a seminar, his guys would go back and ask him to change his software.
Right.
He learned a ton when he got into the BuildNet. When he got tied in with you guys and
Yeah.
all the software, he learned a ton. But
That's when I
basically,
first met him, and he's just a great guy.
he's a great guy. It was basically a Texas
Yeah.
operation,
Right.
and
Worked
every
for
builder
Texas
in
Builders.
Texas used it. And so when he got out of BuildNet, he created Bricks, and he said, "Brick." He told me he told me he hated me, but but he said, "I built Bricks because that's my retirement program." So Hyphen now owns Bricks. They also own Supply Pro and Build Pro, which is basically what Village Homes designed back in the 90s. The networking with your suppliers and your trade contractors. Then you had Builder 360. Builder 360 was uh, Ed Clark.
Oh, I haven't thought of that name in ages.
Ed Clark decided to develop a new comm system, and it was known as Builder 360. And we were working with Ed on building 360, but he was paying for it out of his credit cards.
Oh boy.
And he came to me and he says, "I'm going broke. Will you take over the Builder 360 program?" Well, Emma and I looked at each other and we struggled with that for a long time. And I said, we're consultants. We're not software people. And if we buy software, we cannot consult the builders openly
Right.
about what kind of software they should be using because one piece of software doesn't fit every builder.
That's right.
So we passed on it. But what I did is I took Builder 360 and I handed it to HomeSphere. And so Ed Clark ended up with HomeSphere. And then he ended up with Constellation also, because I think what happened was when BuildNet fell apart, um, HomeSphere wanted to buy fast. And they sent somebody down to the auction to get fast, but he didn't get fast. He got BuildSoft. And I think what happened with HomeSphere is they sold Builder 360 and BuildSoft over to Constellation. I don't know that for a fact, but that seems like what happened. So um, the BuildNet, which was Keith Brown, also that was a great opportunity. He basically consolidated all the software into one organization. He didn't get Marks, I don't think, but he consolidated most of the software. You were part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Um,
was Keith and I that came together first. Um,
yeah, that's what I thought.
we both had the same vision. What happened was that GE Capital was funding us because of GE Appliances, and another division of GE Capital was funding Keith Brown. Um, and one day, those people realized they were about to fund the exact same vision from two different divisions of GE Capital. So they call me up at night and they go, "We want you to merge with BillSoft." The next day, I was on a plane to New York.
Okay. Well, I figured that was kind of what happened because I knew you were one of the first ones to go. And then Tom went, and then Lloyd Alliotera went. But basically all the integrated software ended up being in BuildNet.
Right.
And it's too bad it failed. But it was a good, I mean, Constellation's trying to do that now by buying a lot of the stuff. And ECI is trying to do the same thing. And now Hyphen's starting to buy a lot of software also in the operation. But it was an interesting time at that point. I was retained as a consultant with BuildNet at one point, and again I tied in with Craig Schweikert because Craig Schweikert was pretty heavy with um, the BuildNet operation. Um, then you got, I'm just going through some of the software that's out there. You got BuilderTrend. BuilderTrend is really for the custom home builder. It doesn't have a database.
No,
The
no,
builder,
no
hmm?
databases.
It doesn't.
Wow.
If you have a standard plan and try to do a standard plan with BuilderTrend, you have to do the budget every time for every house.
Mm,
So it doesn't really have a way to function for a standard plan builder operation.
right.
But everybody loves their schedule. So what you see is it's set up for a custom home builder. Um, and the builders that are custom home builders, as long as you're under 15, 20 units a year, it's okay. But if you're any kind of volume to where you're duplicating plans in a community, it is a nightmare to try to run that system. But they love the schedule. So most of the builders don't implement the whole program. They sold a ton of stuff though. They've been very successful in dealing in that smaller volume arena over the years. Some of the new stuff that's coming out, Chuck, is Cova, which was Rich Cashin. Rich Cashin was Argos, originally the architectural platform. Um, it was a great system, and it would have been the modern fast. Um, but what happened was MyTech bought it, and MyTech hasn't known what to do with it. MyTech um, They decided to make it modular, but it was an integrated system. And so they tried to make it modular so they could sell modules of Cova off to different builders. They at one point said they wouldn't sell it to anybody that was building less than 500 units a year, which
That
was
shrinks your
asinine.
market pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, what do you got? 20 people that you can market to?
Yeah.
Um, so we do have all the Clayton homes are on Cova. And so all of the builders that have been bought by Clayton are basically Cova builders. I don't
Right.
think there's a one of them that's not a Cova builder. But basically, they lost their way. They bought Cova, then they bought Builder MT. Neither one, they haven't done much at all in marketing them and really doing anything with them. Then some of the ones that I'm not, that we've had a relationship with, but I don't know a whole bunch about them, is you've got Home Builder One. We've got one of our builders, the Althoff Homes out of Indiana, um, is on Home Builder One.
Is that the one that comes from Australia?
No, I think that came from the big builders,
Okay.
but it was very unstructured when we saw it. I think they've learned a lot by working with Althoffs because Althoffs were really very well organized. It's three brothers,
Mm.
and they're extremely well organized. Then you got Threadcore, which is a new one. It's small to medium sized builder oriented. Then you got Hierarch that's making a big push right now. They got a lot of money invested in them. And that's basically 3D estimating. And I go back to the Don Evans era, um, and what they're trying to do. They're they're looking at it the wrong way though. They're looking at it more from sales than from purchasing and production. So they say they have it, but they don't.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of issues. They've hired some people, and I don't know if it's coming about. I'll find out the next time we have a convention. But they've been working with us for a while, trying to figure out what to do. But they basically have. I think they need to change their orientation a little bit from marketing to production, and I think that would help them tremendously in what they're doing. Skew World, which is again a Rich Cashin situation. It's data management, data mining, and how to utilize the data. And what they do is they clean up the databases and produce reports.
Mm.
They're doing a pretty good job. They're working with Davis Homes out of and Davis Homes and Marks out of um, Indianapolis. And they've been everybody's been very happy with what they've been able to do, but they haven't they haven't grown much uh, beyond the Davis involvement at this point. So, but they're out there, and so I'm just running down since you're interested in where the software is and what we're doing, I looked at it and I said, well, I'll go through my background. Basically, everything that I've written, looked at here is basically with the software and what the software and what I've had a relationship with the software over the years. Um, so that's kind of it. And one thing I did want to say, and I know I've run out of time, but I look at the computer, I mentioned it earlier, it's strictly a management tool. The software and the computer are tools for the builder. And the problem, and everybody gets upset at the software. I mean, you see builders that have 3 and 4 or 5 different softwares that they're dealing with,
Mm.
or they've bought these integrated software. I bought Marks, I bought Fast, I bought uh, Newstar. None of them work. No, they work. You don't.
Right.
The root cause of most of the software is the fact that the builder will not adhere to what the software does.
And
They won't change.
the proof of that is all the builders who are successful with those software packages.
Absolutely.
You know, what's the difference? The difference is this builder bought
Well,
into the philosophy, bought into the proactive management. And this guy's like, oh, I just react to things. I just react.
well, I have a report that I used to get on a spreadsheet report. I want the same report. Well, I'm sorry. We've got an integrated system. We don't do those reports anymore. Oh, I got to have that report. But the other thing that I look at is, so I say basically it's the builder that failed. It's not the software that failed. If they would just adhere to the software and what the software asks. I've got one down in Colorado Springs. It's just, they're killing me. They went on COVA and it's like 4 years, millions and millions of dollars. It still isn't implemented. I have another company out in Oregon. It took them 3 months, 100% implemented. What's the difference? Well, the guys in Colorado Springs are fighting it. Okay. The other
Yeah,
the other thing that I look at is the builder needs to have a strong advocate. It's hard for the builder. One of the things I look at is you need discipline if you're going to implement a software system. Well, builders aren't disciplined. You can't put the word entrepreneur and discipline in the same sentence. It doesn't work. Okay. So they need somebody that's an advocate, a strong advocate for the software, for the implementation program. This is the way we're going to implement it. This is step one, step two, step three, step four. This is a time frame for implementing these pieces as we go through, and somebody needs to hold people accountable for it. But a lot of times what happens is the builder buys it, they spend their hundreds of thousands of dollars on the software, and then they walk away. Okay, it's done. No, it hasn't done.
it's only just begun.
Yeah, I mean, they're still in the starting blocks. Okay. Then the other thing that bothers me is when I look at it, if you're going to do the one to one to one to one, everything is tied together. That's my phone. The construction schedule is the backbone of the system.
Right.
I gotta implement this construction schedule because that's going to dictate my purchase order system. It's going to dictate my payment process. It's going to dictate my accounting and everything. So I've got to start out with a schedule. Well, what's the one thing that the builders never implement on an integrated system?
Scheduling.
The schedule. Well, it's hard. Well, yeah, it's hard, but you're going to be fighting your system forever if you don't do it, if you don't adhere to the discipline of having it, and don't leave it to the individual superintendent.
And they have to understand that the scheduling system is not there to track what's happened. It's there to drive what should happen next.
Correct. Correct. And most of the scheduling system, especially when you leave it up to a superintendent, is just a reporting document. It's not a planning document. And it should be a planning document. It should be centrally controlled out of the operation. The production manager should be the one that's controlling the construction schedule. Okay, so that's some of the stuff that bothers me. And then the other thing I wrote down, I got two other things, Chuck. Builder systems, processes, and procedures need to be consistent, reliable, efficient, effective, and there's got to be discipline in it. If you don't have that, the system's going to fail. So, consistent implementation, consistent data, consistent way you are operating with the system,
Right.
that it's reliable, that everybody in the company can rely on the information that's coming out of the system, that it's efficient and effective. So, in other words, it streamlines my organization. The one to one to one to one. It streamlines everything. I can basically be paperless in my organization. If I can have my budget and my POs and my schedule and my accounting system all tied together in the same documentation, I don't need invoices. I don't need to send out POs. I don't need any of this stuff. But try to teach a builder that they can do that in a paperless manner. It's tough. Now, the other problem for you guys, software people, the home building industry is huge. It represents 3 to 5% of the GDP of the United States. Okay. The problem is it's made up of a whole bunch of little guys.
Right.
There's 95,000 builders. Everybody looks at it and says, "Oh, look at this. I'm going to go invest in the home building industry." Yeah, it's huge in the aggregate, but we got 95,000 builders. Okay. The typical builder builds less than 20 units a year.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess, yeah, the numbers of builders go way up when you get down to that low volume.
Oh my God, yes. And I told Emma, I said, Emma, isn't the average builder less than 20? She says, you could probably use 10
Yeah,
as the number. Now, granted, the public builders, the top 50, are running around 50% of the volume of across the country. But if you look at your market for software, you got about 200 builders that are building over 100 units a year, and that's your market.
yes, yeah, it's small.
You know, you get down. Builders don't think of themselves as businessmen until they're somewhere between 50 and 75 units a year.
Until then, they're just an artist.
They're an artist. Absolutely. They're an artist. They are making more money than they could have made um, in another job. And they're involved in their community and so forth, and they're happy. I mean, they're making enough money to be happy. I mean, I've got one of my guys builds 13 houses a year, custom, makes over $1 million a year.
Yeah,
Am I going to get him to build 15 or 20? No, because that's going to complicate his life.
right.
So he's happy under 15 units a year.
Which is perfectly fine.
Right. And I love him for it. He's one of the most organized builders I've got.
Wow.
But when you start looking at the market for you, or looking at the market for software, it's very, very difficult to deal with our industry because you make a big commitment into software in development. And then how big is my market? So anyway,
Yeah.
those are just some of the things that I thought that as we were talking, and yet, I'm sorry I wasn't around when you called. Emma and I were off getting an award from NAHB. We got uh, what do they call it? The Exemplary Service and Home Building Award that we got from NHB. And then our anniversary was June 12th. And that was 55 years for us. So I took her to Jamaica, where we originally had our honeymoon, and
Nice.
stayed not in the same hotel because the hotel's gone, but basically in the same place in the grill. And then we went to Panama to show the kids their heritage from Emma's side, some of my grandkids. So
Nice.
that's where we were.
Very good. Well, Chuck, it's been great talking to you.
I'm sorry I went a little long.
That's okay.
All right.
We're good.
Good talking to you. We got to keep this up.
Yeah, definitely. I find some more people for this process because I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, I think this is a good process. So yeah, I will. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you
All
later.
right. You take care. Bye.
Bye.